This is 007 Radio. Strap yourself in, because we'll be going on a ride deep to the heart of Earth's mysteries.
Hi, we're here with Callaman, who is the author of The Mayan Calendar and the Transformation of Consciousness. Now, I'd like to start off with what is the Mayan calendar? Could you tell us a little about its perfect waves of the 13s, the 7s, the 20s? Go for it.
Okay. Well, there's been a lot of buzz around the Mayan calendar in recent years. And with a lot of people, the buzz has been around a particular date, December 21, which is coming close up here. Before saying anything else, I don't place very much importance on any particular date, and not this one either. But I do place a lot of importance on the Mayan calendar because it provides a completely different knowledge of time than we used to. It is like in the Mayan calendar system, each time period has some kind of a quality, like a spiritual quality, I would say. And they used to be symbolized by glyphs and deities and birds and all these kind of things that they used in order to give their own people a sense of what is the quality of the time period that we are starting now, or maybe a time period that they would be ending. They would celebrate shifts between time periods in ancient times among the Maya. They would use their pyramids for celebrations when a new time era came in. So already by saying this, I think it should be clear. They looked upon time not as just sort of a line, ticking line of measurable time, but rather as eras that influence the mind of people. And my particular interpretation of the Mayan calendar has been all about how does it influence our consciousness? How does it influence the mind? Because my basic philosophy is that is simply to say it as inside, so outside. In other words, we tend to create outside a reality that is consistent with the way it looks inside. Then, of course, people wonder, where does the inside come from? Well, that's where the Mayan calendar comes in, because it tells you how our insides and how we perceive the world is changing. And it is changing because we are not isolated beings. We are beings that are in a resonance with the earth, in a resonance with the cosmos. And what that means is that with a certain predictable, in a certain predictable way, we are receiving new ways of looking at the world. And so the consequence of this is that when you study the Mayan calendar historically, is that you will see that at certain points in times, there's been an internal shift in the human beings. And as a result, they've started to create an external reality that is different. And it's quite fascinating because you get to realize that much of the dominating worldview in modern society really are illusions. For instance, the idea that your thinking is only something that happens here inside of your brain, as if you're not directly under the influence of these shifting spiritual energies that are constantly influencing it. Rather than I should say, it is like the materialist philosophy that dominates our world is increasingly becoming clear that this is a superstition, basically, and not the other way around. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it gives you some idea as to why I think this is an interesting calendar and why it's fundamentally different from other calendars.
These wheels within wheels that you speak of, which ones are tuned to what frequency, and what is that frequency ruled by? Sometimes they say that it's a planet, right? So there's the sun rhythm, which is it 13 waves, the sun's? Or 13 days, 7
Well,
days, 6 nights?
okay, there are many different levels and many different durations of the calendar system of the Maya, and it can seem initially very complex. There, as you're saying, there are certain processes that develop in 13 steps. That's a significant one. But the 13 steps, for instance, each symbolized by a certain deity or a bird or whatever, the 13 steps are reproduced on several different levels. So, which means that at its most simple level, it is basically a count of 13 days. So you count days 13, almost like you count a week of 7. And then you start another counting 13. But then these 13 steps, they also exist at much, much longer time spans. So there are those time spans that are billions of years, where you have 13 steps. And these 13 steps, as you're saying, is like a wave. So it is like 7 days and 6 nights, or 7 peaks and 6 valleys that have been developing the universe to its present state. And the real importance of the time we're living in, and I'm not pointing at any particular date, is, however, there is a real importance around this time, and this is that it is like the 13 first steps of 9 different levels in the Mayan calendar have now been completed, and it's like the first wave of creation of the universe that has been creating that. And we're now coming to some kind of a turning point, and which is partly unknown territory, I should say, and it opens up a new kind of a world for us. And that's another thing that is very fascinating about the Mayan calendar, to be here at this particular time.
Could this territory that you speak of be the place where people knew how to work the Mayan calendar?
Well, I think personally that the Mayan calendar will be less and less important in the future. It used to be, it has been very important for us, and I think much of the importance is really to understand the spiritual meaning of it, to realize that we are the products of these spiritual waves that has created the universe and ourselves. I think in the time ahead, yes, there is tremendous amount to learn from it, and we may learn how we are, how we came to be shaped like the ones we are, but I'm not so certain that it will be a time when it will be terribly important to actually follow day by day the calendar and so forth.
I don't mean to say that we will resurrect the Mayan calendar and start using it. What I suggest is that in the I Ching and around the world, we see the same fundamental principles laid out in those number patterns. So what we would do is we would understand them, create our own, and then we'd call it our system, which it would be the perfect 13 moons of a year with the 1 day out of time. And then we would follow the sun's pattern and the elliptical pattern. And we would be able to trace them just day by day, and people would actually perform more more rituals for themselves so they can feel more grounded without having to go to a church.
Yeah. I like what you're saying. Um, it's and um, I think we're coming back to a world where the large centralized structures of the world in all respects will be less and less important, like the churches and everything else. Um, we're entering an era of a sort of a union creativity, unity creativity, and some people are really coming into this, and they see the tremendous joy that will be associated with that kind of living. And another group of people are only partially aware of this change and are still sort of holding on to or living within the old frameworks of existence.
Yes, what we're talking about is everyone learning that they are actually co-creators. If you choose to live a certain way inside, you can reflect it outside, and you will start to see that you actually created. You were the archetype of that universe.
Yes. Yes, that is so much the message of the Mayan calendar. Is this thing as inside, so outside, and not the other way around. And there is a freedom in that, as inside, so outside, because things will then come from you. You know what you're saying, co-creators. Rather than if it's as outside, so inside, it would mean that you're always sort of subordinated to what is happening on the outside, and that's not what we want anymore.
But personally, it is outside as inside is outside. You can be affected by the outside world.
Oh,
You just gotta stand your ground and know that the inside could change it.
oh yes, absolutely. I'm
Now,
not
what I
saying,
would love to ask you
yeah.
is who started the Mayan calendar? Because from my research, I've seen that they speak of gods such as Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan, and these were bearded men.
Okay, that's one mythology, you might say. Well, it's the first of all, it really does have a history, and the different aspects of the calendar system comes in to play at different points in time. It's fairly unanimously considered that 2,500 years ago, around 550 BC, that the Maya started to use the sacred core of the system, which is the 260-day long sacred calendar. The oldest inscriptions of this is from that time, and you don't find them among the Maya. Actually, it's the people, neighboring people that are called Zapotecs, who created a site called Monte Alban in southern Mexico, in the state called Oaxaca, and that's the oldest thing. Now, that was the beginning. Around the time of Christ came the next big step, the so-called long count. And that is a larger calendar system that began 3114 BC, and that is the one that is now ending. And that was a big shift because it went from these sort of small daily calendrical interest to looking at large, long scopes of time. And from our present perspective, what is so remarkable is then that 3114 BC, when this long calendar started, is the time that we know that the first higher civilizations began on our planet. That's when the Sumerians built their first cities. That's when the Egyptians built their first pyramids, and so forth. And so we are now at the time when this whole long count that started with these initial civilizations have now come to some kind of a completion. And it's a time also for us to sort of look at what is this all about, and where will we be going in the future, in the perspective that the long count of the Maya actually was about the evolution of civilization. So, to continue the discussion there, then there is a time period between the time of Christ and about 80,000, which is the classical height when they have maybe 100 calendars, and it just becomes immensely complex for anybody who want to study that. But at that time, around 1000 AD, this calendar collapses. Not only the calendar is abandoned, but also the culture collapses, and since then, the Maya have played a less visible role in human history,
could we liken it
yes,
to the
so
Egyptians, who actually had a golden age and then regressed over time?
Yeah.
It seems like this seems to have happened to the Mayan too.
Yeah, I think so. In the Egyptian case, I think they started with an elevated spirituality, and something similar seems to have happened with the Maya.
Because when you look through the actual studies that have been done on the Mayan calendar and the research into the culture, it was always that the myths told them that someone came and gave them this knowledge.
Well, yeah, that I don't personally believe that. I've heard those myths, and I heard it already in when I was in Mexico the first time some 30 years ago, and Diego Rivera has painted these big, beautiful mural paintings, and it shows a bearded man. They would say he was a Viking, and I sort of thought that's funny because I'm Swedish myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I was wondering, but I don't really believe that. I think it was more like they all shared a common consciousness that was different from what it is now, and so when I hear the plumed serpent or Quetzalcoatl, I don't see it necessarily as a person or a bearded man. I see it more as a spiritual entity that creates the waveforms of the calendar. And the difference was not that they had somebody come and tell them about this calendar, but
A state told them about this calendar?
sorry,
Is it that a conscious state told them about the calendar?
I think so.
And that's what Quetzalcoatl was? In some of the myths, we have the Vuruche or the Vuruchan, I believe, where it would be angels that would fight alongside Kukulkan.
Yeah.
So he had other people there who were bearded and who fought alongside him, and they had the likeness to angels, people who had achieved a certain state.
That could be. I mean, I've been to. There is one famous pyramid in a place called Ekbalam in Mexico. It is amazing, actually. It's in the opening to the pyramid. There is a big jaguar jaw. So you're basically going through the jaguar jaw. But on top of that, and this is what I want to say, on the top of that jaguar, there are statues that looks exactly like the European or the Jewish view of angels, people with wings on their backs, exactly like that. And this is an old Mayan tradition. So they have had that as part of their mythology, and yes, I mean there's always people that are embodying these different spiritual principles, and angels are one.
But they did believe that they could achieve the state that was taught to them by these angels, and they actually carried on the rituals and the ceremonies to achieve those states for thousands of years until they eventually the waveforms just wouldn't allow it anymore.
Yes, I would say so. I agree.
But the people who made and knew these wrote them in stone, knowing that they would keep the riddle long enough for us to come along and find it again and keep it going.
Yeah, it seems so. But it seems also that, you know, they for their own sake, usually these ceremonies were led by their royalty, and the royalty would erect these kind of steles to, you know, to just show their own role in this process. And it was very much also for their own peoples that these ceremonies were held, because it was part in every such time period in the among the Maya. It actually had assigned a certain prophet to it. You could be, if you lived in those days, you could be the prophet in this city of this katun. And a katun is 20 years. So somebody would assign you. You would be you'll be the prophet for this katun. And then it would fall upon you to say, well, these times will be so and so and such, and we should prepare ourselves, or we should do whatever it is. It's quite a responsible role that such a prophet of a cartoon would have. And I'm saying this to emphasize that, you know, maybe there was some message to the future to us in what they were doing, but it was very much also a message, their way of living that they recorded, and for their own sake, in order to understand how times were shifting according to these various waveforms.
In their rituals, did you ever come across them using some sort of entheogenic drug?
I have not come across that. I'm certain that it was used in. I've used maybe some mild form with some Mayan elders, but um, um, but it seems quite clear that you know, certain kind of mushrooms were part of their rituals,
And still are in some circumstances.
Maybe especially in Oaxaca, but I would think also in Guatemala and so forth. So yes, but I don't have experience of it myself, but I have every reason to believe that it happened in the past, and it happens now too.
Hmm. Because these are things that are taken and seen on a large scale and a large scope. So it would take something that would expand the mind to actually understand such a phenomenon.
Yes, uh, uh, but of course there are also, you know, most shamans in the world are using other practices to expand their vision, and so it's not the only way, but it is one way.
Hmm.
Uh, but of course, they, you know, part of that is also a lot of drumming and dancing and so forth that a lot of indigenous peoples are using to expand their vision, um, to be in the spirit world and so forth.
Well, have when you started up on this, you flew down to Mexico. And how
Yeah.
old were you and what had happened? How did it lead you? What were the series of omens that led you on this trail?
Yeah. Well, uh, it's I was, you know, I was fascinated at an early point, really, by the fact that how come there were pyramids also in Mexico and as well as in Egypt that of course everybody knows about. And in those days, when I was young, the pyramids in Mexico were not that well known, even though they, you know, anybody who studied it would learn about it. But I was fascinated by for the simple reason that how come that these cultures, presumably, and I think so still, developed independently, and yet they came up with this idea of building pyramids in both places. Now, what is that all about? And why did so much the civilizations in Europe and China and in the Americas develop essentially around the same time? You know, some people would say there's a couple of thousand years difference. Well, maybe so, but you know, the human beings have been around. Our species has been around for at least 160,000 years, and then suddenly they all develop these high cultures in different parts of the world at the same time. So there was an enigma. It doesn't fit with our worldview, but it told some. It was an enigma, and I was fascinated by it. And so there came this time. I was then a graduate student at the University of Stockholm. By training, I'm a chemist or a biologist, and felt I needed a break from all these test tubes and all the existence of the in the laboratory, and and I saw this note on a bulletin board at the university saying, you know, go to Mexico and live in a Mexican family and learn Spanish. And, you know, it just pulled me. And I sent in uh, I mean, it's actually hard to believe how how the world looked before the internet. I sent a letter paying some kind of deposit to Mexico, which was an enormous difference at that time. I never actually heard back from them. But I decided, okay, I'll go there. And so I came there, and actually it worked out pretty well. And they took care of me, this school and so forth. But, you know, it wasn't like you could. You would have to trust that the mail worked the way in a reasonable time and so forth. And so I came there, and I came on the Day of the Dead. You've heard about the Day of the Dead?
Yeah.
You've heard about that. I mean, it's when so it was a complete, and I didn't even know it. I landed in Mexico City, which then was the world's largest city with 20 million people, and they were all going back across and out to their villages to have their dinners with you know, their deceased ancestors, and eating the kind of things that their ancestors, their, you know, uncle Jose, the kind of bread he liked to eat, they would eat that, and all that kind of thing on the cemeteries. And you know, and I came from the laboratory in Stockholm, where people, which is sort of you know, orderly environment, and anyway, I thought this is a great place to be, and I really loved Mexico, and you know, especially then I took a third class train. And third class train in those days in Mexico, all the way from Mexico City to Merida. And that meant, you know, actually literally spending your time with the chickens and the pigs, small size, literally. It was a rolling market. It didn't go very. The train took 2 nights and one day, and every station people came up and sold things, and some people came up to sell clothes, and then they used the toilets became the what's it called, the way you try on the new clothes, and people so you couldn't go to the toilet because people were testing clothes there, and anyway, it was just very different. And but the closer I came down to Merida, which is the capital of the Yucatan, which is the center, you might say, of the Mexican Maya, you know, I just felt more and more connected to the people, and what really made the difference was the fact that they, among all the backpackers, it seemed that they saw something in me, that they felt, you know, they somehow they they would come up, you know, these Indians, they didn't speak Spanish or anything, but or very little maybe, And they would, it happened a couple of times that somebody came up, just ran up to me and gave me a little amulet or gave me something small and said, it's para ti, it's for you, and disappeared. And I, wow, that um, that made some kind of a difference.
Did you ever see these
I don't
people
know what
again?
they.
Or was it the
No,
same person constantly, or did it keep changing?
no. It happened, I think, twice, but that's a lot. That's they came up and gave me something and disappeared.
Mhm.
Uh, that's not normally how they treat backpackers, because usually, it's how do I make money of this stupid tourist? It's more like the way that. But anyway, so um,
Do you still have the amulets?
yes,
Good, good.
um, and so I felt very much at home there, and also, in those days, uh, today Chichen Itza, the biggest pyramid or the most famous pyramid, it's like a big theme park. Last time I was there, it was like 20 bus loads standing on a row. You go through, it's all walled in and stuff like that. Now, when I was there in 1979, I just went in the middle of the night, no problem. There was no, I got in there and I would go to the observatory and stand there and sort of look at the holes in the walls, in the stone walls, and see certain stars in there, and just feel this must have been the way they experienced it 1,000 years ago. And that was great. And it was a moonlight night. I was in the night in Chichen Itza, and that whole thing,
I just want to ask you one question. You had appeared on Cinco de Mayo, and it was an important day. When you went to this pyramid, was it also an important day?
yeah, I've been there on the descent of Kukulkan, where there is you probably have heard about that, the sort of light show, where I didn't do that in 1979. This is something I've done more recently, but on the equinoxes, on the spring equinox, the 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 terraces of the pyramid creates shadows, so that the plumed serpent that is around one of the staircases of the pyramid, it actually gets 7 triangles and of light and 6 triangles of darkness. So it forms this particular wave movement that the Mayan calendar is all about. And when you sit there, it's so amazing, because you can't quite comprehend how did they do this. There's no trial and error. I mean, you can't just sort of, okay, let's build a pyramid, and then you can't just move it if it's wrong. And only 2 days of the year when you can actually test whether your idea of projecting this kind of a light show will work. So that is something I really recommend to anybody who has the chance to go and see the descent of the plumed serpent on the spring or the fall equinox.
Do you have any idea how they moved those large stones?
See what? How they?
How they moved and placed those large stones?
Well, in Mexico and among the Maya, you don't really have that problem, I think, where, with the Egyptian pyramids or some of these other things, it really blows your mind how did they actually move them and so forth. But the stones in the Mayan pyramids are built of are much smaller. You're not awed by the actual
Mm-hmm.
building technique in that sense. And Yeah. So I don't know that, but I don't even see it as a problem. I haven't really heard that anybody has considered it as a problem, or something that's difficult to understand. They are about this size, and two guys could probably carry these kind of stones for the most part.
But some of them bear no chisel marks.
No chisel. Oh, I see. Okay. Well, maybe you know more than I do. I into it because I yeah, yeah,
Well, what I'd love to ask you is, do you think pyramids work?
that they work. Yeah. In what way?
Well, I would assume that the pyramids are using the proportions and the actual dimensions of the Earth grid, the wave patterns that are traveling across the plane of the Earth. And in structuring these monuments, they actually spread the wave out or amplify it in the given area and whichever wave they want, depending on the geometry and the proportions that they're using.
Okay. Well, maybe so.
And you're a biologist, so I'd love to tell you. I've been doing some research on the Golden Section Pyramid, which was done in Russia. They did some research on the pyramids, the Nubian pyramids, and it's a pyramid where the height and the base are in golden mean relation to each other. And when placed near plants, the plants actually gained a beneficial growth of almost 300%. And he started putting them outside in they were pretty tall. I think one of them was over 100 feet. And biologists came by and started to notice extinct flowers were popping up.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
It's called the Golden Section Pyramid. You should definitely look into it because if you want to
In,
work with plants, there's something about taking the energy that's around us, amplifying it to a certain tune, almost like it's a radio station, and it will be broadcast in a given radius.
Now, you say in Russia, is that Ukraine? I've heard about a pyramid in Ukraine.
It's probably his. If it's a
Oh,
large, narrow one, it's his.
is it an old pyramid or is it?
I believe it was done in the 80s or the 70s. All
Oh,
fiberglass.
it's a new one. I see. I see. I would call that new, but yeah,
Oh, okay, yeah. No, it's not the mounds and the no, it's not an ancient site.
new construction they've done to study it. Okay. Yes. Interesting. Yes.
It just seems that the step pyramids that we see are in great relation to the patterns that the Islamic people would draw on the floor and on the walls of their temples, and it just seems to follow the I Ching and that grid system. It's a series of eight waves
Yeah.
or eight vectors,
Yeah.
and it's just great to see all over the world that humans have known it and will continue to know it. And
Yeah.
so, what do you see for the future? For this after 21st, what people are actually waiting for is in a couple days. You don't think that anything's going to happen that day. You believe that it's already happened, is happening, and will continue to happen.
Yeah. I don't believe anything will happen, except, of course, that. So I believe that this shift point was actually October 28, 2011, which is about a year ago. And now, what is happening, of course, is that this is the day that people believe the 13 Baktuns will end. And that, of course, may make a difference. And what I hope is that people are sort of setting new intentions for their lives, that they get inspired to set new intentions for the future, intentions that are more consistent with a unity way of living. That's what I hope. I'm absolutely convinced that nothing will happen in the sky or anything like that on that December 21, 2012. I just hope that people are using it to set good intentions.
So, what we're talking about is the availability for you to actually change and become an architect of your
Yes.
own world. So, it's happening. And I've seen so many people go through it in my life since the 2000s. It will not stop. It is speeding up. It's a snowball going down a hill, building up steam. And I just hope that people take this and heed it and take it to heart because this could change your life, ladies and gentlemen. All you have to do is realize that you are creators and everything will change.
Yeah.
So you predict that past 2012 is going to be good times?
Um, I don't believe any sort of sudden change like this. If you look at the time, the year 2011, which was the real shift point, so to speak. Um, when the year 2011 came to an end, Time magazine they always assign a person of the year. For the year 2011, they choose to make the person of the year the protester,
Hmm.
because um, the whole world in the year 2011 um, was in, but there was a tremendous desire for change. There was the Arab Spring, there was the Occupy movement, and almost all over the world there were huge various manifestations where people were sort of looking for a change and protesting against the established order. And this is really the reason this happened is that last year on March 9th, 2011, a new wave was activated, the ninth wave of the Mayan pyramids. The Mayan pyramids are built in 9 levels. And the ninth and the highest wave was for the first time in human history activated last year. And that wave uh, brings a mind to people that has no veils. All the veils were removed when that wave was activated. And the result was that people were starting to see in a new way. And initially, this resulted in sort of saying that, I don't want to pay this banker, I don't want this dictator, and all that kind of a stuff. And it just showed that when that wave was activated, people started to see things in a new way. And if you look at the Occupy movement that emerged in 2011, it was really based on a completely new philosophy that went outside of all the previous frameworks of politics and so forth. It was really guided of a much more holistic mentality and not necessarily of creating divisions, but sort of finding solutions in a way that really hadn't existed before. So it was more like a holistic philosophy that surfaced. But it all came out of this shift, this new wave that was activated in the Mayan calendar, the ninth wave. And the thing is that this wave will continue from now on or from that date on and will actually continue forever. To say why things slowed down in the year 2012, that would be too technical. I would have to go into too much detail about the calendar system. But what I want to say is that because of this ninth wave and the big role that it will be continue to have, over the next 20 or 30 years or so, the people will be shifting their perception of the world, and they will really start to create a world that is based on the principles of unity and non-separation. And there is no particular date when everything will change in the future, but there is this ongoing change, and there is the fact that this wave has now landed and will continue to transform ourselves. Initially the youngest people, initially those that are the most sensitive, but eventually it will spread everywhere, and the world is changing in a direction that has been set by the highest intelligence in the cosmos. And that's what we're up for now. Now, whether that will be the hard way or the easy way, I don't know. That's
It
that.
seems like we get to create our reality in whichever path we choose, and hopefully it won't be the path of destruction, but the path of creation.